All right, everybody, it's Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, exciting night. We're going to have the opportunity to have Mr. Nathan Tankus join us.
Hey, everybody.
And the ultimate opportunity here to talk about things that I think are the most important stuff going on today. Give me 1 second. I'm going to bring Nathan on here. And without further ado, Nathan, how you doing, bro?
Doing well.
All right. So just so you know, we're picking up a little static from the headset, I think.
All right.
There we go. I think you actually may have changed it right there.
Okay, perfect.
So tonight, what we wanted to talk about, we had several key themes that we wanted to hit on. And I guess before we even dive into this, I want to thank you for doing this. I want to tell you what a pleasure it was to meet you in Kansas City.
Yeah, it was great.
And I want to thank you guys also for working with our team to help educate us, to make us even stronger, to be better messengers, and to have a stronger foundation in modern monetary theory so we can get a progressive agenda passed. So thank you so much for that, Nathan.
Absolutely.
All right. So here's the situation, Nathan. We got a problem. We got a problem with our politicians. Our politicians won't tell the truth or can't tell the truth. And just so you know, do me a favor, unplug your headset one quick time and then plug it back in. Talk to me.
Is that working?
Much better.
Okay, perfect.
All right. So our politicians won't tell the truth. Our politicians tell us things that people want to hear. They want to hear that our government runs like a household budget. They want to hear that their taxes are paying for things. They want to hear all these fairy tales that make them feel comfortable. And they're not interested necessarily in truth if that truth causes them to violate what their hero, like a Bernie Sanders, might say in the middle of a debate that would throw them off. They're incapable or unwilling to think on their own 2 feet. They require Bernie Sanders to specifically say, taxes don't fund spending. Or they're looking for Bernie Sanders to go, hey, listen, it's the people's money. It's not taxpayer dollars. You know?
You've really been working on that, man.
Here, let me see if I have a couple other ones in there, too. We don't need to reduce the deficit. Sometimes we got to increase the deficit. The deficit is important to raise it. We got to blow the deficit up.
Man, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, I'm a Jew born in Brooklyn. That's pretty good.
So okay, and I love that because it's like a Wall Street speculation tax, you know. But this is a very serious point, though. Many Bernie-crats are incapable of free thought. Many Bernie-crats are unwilling to consider the fact that Bernie has to talk to the lowest common denominator because otherwise he'll be labeled a kook or a loon. And the people that are enlightened have to give him air cover. Not just him, but all of the politicians, like a Ro Khanna. I mean, I don't care whether you like Ro Khanna or not. The point is, someone like Ro Khanna is right up on the edge of MMT. Someone like Tim Canova is desperately trying to find a way to fit that in because he is definitely very, very close, if not in line with MMT. So the question is, what is it about politicians that makes them incapable of telling the truth? And what is it that makes regular people incapable of understanding that politicians have to get elected? They're not economists.
Yeah. I think this is the key point to focus on, is that a politician who's running for office, they are working with the world how it is, with the rhetorical landscape the way it is, and they have to work within that when they're running for office, when they're trying, especially on the national stage, pushing things to the national stage. it's very, very, very rare, extremely rare, that someone can push a message, from scratch with no prior real introduction to it from the national stage. It's too late by that point. There's a reason that all that Reason is funded, that Cato Institute is funded, that Heritage Foundation, that all these institutions have been funded since at least the 60s, if not earlier, especially in the early 70s, to work in developing not just one message, but multiple messages that can all possibly come together to cause the same policies. That's the key point. That these messages are extraordinarily powerful. I mean, it's not a coincidence that Margaret Thatcher picked up on a narrative that neoliberals have been developing for at least a decade, to say it's not public money, it's taxpayers' money. But she wasn't introducing the public to that. She was reinforcing something that was already in the air. And I love Bernie. I love Bernie in a lot of ways, but for whatever reason, he hasn't been willing to champion that through himself on the national stage. And at a certain level, I understand it. What politicians do, what their skill set, for good or ill, is working with things as they are. 10, 12 years ago, when you were talking about inequality, you couldn't use statistics like the top 1% of 1% of 1%. You couldn't be giving that kind of rhetorical line. It was a development since literally the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression had to happen. Occupy Wall Street had to happen and really put that message out there. And there had to be a significant intellectual apparatus that supported this message of inequality for years, about inequality and about income and wealth, for years and years and years before Bernie could capture people's imaginations with that message. And that's just income inequality. That's not that difficult to get people to get, that some people have a lot more money than other people. That's not super difficult. But the way he talked about it and just the general conversation about inequality was something you needed a multi-year, essentially intellectual project to push through. And that's what we have to do. This is where I think the crucial mistake that what you call Bernie-crats, or certain people who think if Bernie isn't literally saying it with his own words, then it doesn't count. It's illegitimate. Is that's the wrong way. That's the reverse. Bernie picks up the best stuff that social movements and intellectuals and different organizations have been able to put out there in the public consciousness, and does the best with that he can. And if we want MMT to be that next thing, if we want someone on the national stage to confidently and self-assuredly, pick up on our rhetoric and on our messages, then there's no other choice but for us to put it in the public consciousness as much as possible, to build organizations and institutions, which of course is what the Modern Money Network is all about, to make it not only that they feel like they can use this rhetoric, but that they would lose respectability by not using our rhetoric and not speaking to our issues. This is the key point to me. And so if you are saying I'm not going to push through a message unless it's gone through Bernie Sanders or any national politician's mouth first, you're putting the cart before the horse. Things are supposed to work exactly reverse. And if you're not willing to listen to things as they come up from social movements, then what else are you doing? But on the flip side, as you see, Raul Carrillo's article right there, I think we are making big strides in explaining not just that this is the truth, but that it's a salient, fundamental, important truth that has all sorts of implications.
So this right here, I want everybody to take a peek at this that maybe hasn't seen it before. But I think this is extremely important. Like, I am going to ride Raul's mule here as long as it'll stay on its feet, because this is one of the most important things. I mean, you talk about the ultimate racist classist, bigoted, evil, xenophobic comment, taxpayer money. I mean, this right here is the equivalent of trying to make, it's using propaganda. It's trying to elevate the white person, the white family, the white picket fence, the people that did good, all the other little tropes that make all those moochers and other scumbags, it really is the way to create otherness. Otherness is exactly it. And I'm going to show you, this is from a guy that you probably know. I'm going to pull it up here real quick. His name's Nathan Becker, and he's on Twitter quite a bit. And I put this thing up here a minute ago, and it really does go back to the myth that the money creator is the same as the money user. And I love this meme because it really does speak loud and proud to all the evil that's in our midst based on this lie that we are doing everything we can to dismantle. Real quick, jiggle your cord again one more time. It's getting staticky again. There you go. Anyway, so let's go ahead and drop this meme down, and let's just get back to you and I for a second. This is a serious issue because this is something that has been pounded into our head. The taxpayer dollar, the taxpayer shouldn't, and you're always, well, Donald Trump's taxpayer money to go golfing. We're going to put a Wall Street, all this stuff. And the reality is that this narrative, no matter how well-meaning, has absolutely crushed our ability to break free of this very, very destructive myth.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, and I would emphasize Earl's point that it's not just that this isn't how spending works at the federal level. It's not just that it completely abstracts from how governments actually create money, are deeply involved with the financial process, and you can't simply abstract from all of that and just focus on taxation. But it's also that governments impose all sorts of different obligations on people that aren't taxes. I mean, there's a reason they're not saying civil forfeiture money, fine money, fee money. The reason that in Ferguson, Missouri, I'm sure every single elected politician in Ferguson, Missouri gets up and talks about taxpayers' money, but they don't talk about fine and fee money. They don't talk about your outstanding warrant money. They don't where in fact 50% of the revenue in Ferguson, Missouri is coming on fines and fees that predominantly target people of color and poor people of color at that. So beyond just that this isn't how it works at the federal level, it also it's the specific revenue stream that they're focusing. The reason they say taxpayers' money, they're not even thinking of Social Security taxes. What they mean is income taxes. And income taxes is about, the richer are paying a higher percentage of those income taxes than other people, ergo they are lesser. It ignores all the sorts of things that we do that specifically target those groups on that level. And third, of course, there's just the most basic point that this is public purpose, not taxpayers' purpose. If a taxpayer, quote unquote, if someone with a lot of income wants to accomplish something on their own, they can start a nonprofit or they can start a business and they can, spend quote unquote their money to do things. But then there's public money and there's public goals. And it's when you talk about the taxpayer, as we said, as the article, and as I think everyone sort of intuitively understands, the archetypal taxpayer, the person they're dog whistling to, is an upper income white person. That key point is just fundamentally anti-democratic. When you're income inequality, if you're doing things by taxpayer, beyond all the MMT problems with that in terms of its coherence, it's necessarily about those with more income should get more of a decision-making power in our society. It's a fundamentally anti-democratic idea beyond being an incoherent idea. And on these bases alone, let alone all these other bases, which I think are important too, we should be rejecting this narrative and be talking about, members of our society.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's put this comment up here. I'm going to let you have at it because Becky Maria is coming in trying to teach us how it is, but she's really not. I mean, her point is like Joe Q. Public. This is what many people that don't understand economics say. These are the kinds of comments that they say, and they don't realize that it's completely and utterly devoid of value. But the dog whistle politics, and this brings up a point that I was going to make, Nathan, that it's not just the wealthy that think this way. A lot of times, and you're back to staticky, buddy. A lot of things that happen is we have people out there who are poor or not terribly well off, and who think that, hey, I pay tax. And this is their way of finding viability in this world, is to believe that somehow or another their taxes are paying for things at the federal level. And they tell you, although I carried 50 pounds of ice up 20 flights of stairs, and I worked 40 hours. I worked 60. I don't care. It's still not my tax money doing it. Okay. And, this narrative is so ridiculously hard to break through. And it's not like we're not sitting here saying this as if we're like just coming up with something. We're giving you facts and we're in the know. That's the most important thing. You're not here because we're a bunch of guys just talking. We're in the know and we're telling you this is a straight truth. Your tax dollars are deleted. They don't serve the purpose that you think they do. And that's okay. We just need to get you to the other side so you understand, and it will change the way you see the world. It really will, because this fundamental fact is very vital, okay? Very, very vital to us making progress as a nation. But that brings me to the point that I was making. You always see the people that are one step above the pig slop, and they are they're the ones looking over people's shoulders at Walmart to see if they're getting crab meat with their food stamps. They're the ones chasing people around to see if they got over on some sort of extra 1 week of unemployment that they didn't deserve. Or, there's some, hey, why are you getting $10 extra in your check a month for, a child? Wouldn't you have another baby to have more money? And they're the ones that are out there policing each other in some sort of a weird, race to the bottom. I don't get it. But that right there, what our friend Becky said, is largely a symptom of that problem. That really perpetuates at the lower levels. It perpetuates this myth. And it has the lower people attacking one another instead of realizing the truth is so much more freeing to actually make progress with. I'm sorry, Nathan, can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's really interesting that the first thing to bring up isn't, how much I'm paying and, how much it's decreasing my wealth in general. It's how much she's working every week. And I think that's really interesting because no one's saying that you didn't do real work. No one's saying that you didn't give up, a certain amount of labor time, and that labor time didn't contribute to our society. But guess what? The person next to you, or the person, down the street, who's making $15,000 a year, not paying much, if any, income tax, paying some Social Security tax, I'm sure paying a lot of fines and fees, maybe has a payday loan. Well, they're also working. They're also contributing, and that's what contributes. It's the real resources, the biophysical resources, the time that some people give, the lands that some people give, the natural resources that some people give. These are the things that get contributed, and they get contributed whether you have a big quote unquote tax burden or a low tax burden. Plenty of people, in fact, the people who are at the lowest income level tend to be people who work a ton. How many people, even just as, a normal middle-class kid in New York City, I encounter people all the time, people from my high school days, people just in my day-to-day life who are working multiple jobs at minimum wage or near minimum wage just to get by. And they're doing it to, so they can make the rent, which is crazy in New York City. They're doing it to meet all these obligations, not just taxes, and they're contributing through that work, whether it's 60 hours, 70 hours, 40 hours, or 40 hours a week. But that contribution, the contribution you make has nothing related to do with your tax burden. Unless you think, that but the thing is, some people think that's, well, they're not contributing as much. If I'm getting paid $30 an hour, I'm contributing so much more and you can see my salary. But they're given the same amount of labor time. And, it's very easy to say, well, I'm more skilled, I deserve this wage, until you actually have to work one of those jobs. I mean, and unless you're just assuming that people are paid their productivity, which is, one of these myths that are out there that you have, that one of the many that we have to contend with, you should think in terms of the contribution of your work. And I think ultimately what comes down here is the people who say these kinds of things, they feel like they don't have enough of a say in where their labor time is going, the major thing they're giving up in their lives. And I think that's the thing to focus on, is why don't you feel like you have enough control, like you have enough say with what's being done with your work, that you feel like things are just being taken away from you and you focus on this one piece, the taxes. I mean, didn't she say she also had a mortgage? Well, why is the interest rate on that mortgage the interest rate that it is? Why did she have to borrow all that money in order to just have a place to live? Shouldn't housing be something that everyone has access to? These are the kind of things you should. This is the point. Is MMT isn't about, there's this free money that's out there and no one has to work or do anything. The point is that precisely that we should be focusing more directly on the work people are doing in their lives, on them taking care of their kids, on the 40 to 60 hours they have to put in. This and the people who are unemployed and trying to make it. That's the stuff we should focus on. And you really think that your tax bill represents the contribution you're making? That whatever sum that was debited from your bank account is really the important part of the work you do every day? That's what you should be focusing on, and you devalue that when you buy into this taxpayer's narrative, which, whether you get it or not, is really about saying that someone much richer than you is really the important and the big macha.
So I'm going to put this meme back up again, and let's just talk about it one by one, because I think this is going to help us out with a lot of myths that we deal with on a daily basis. I mean, the very first one is just so, it speaks to what you just said. I'm a maker, they're a taker. Let's talk about Ayn Rand for a minute. I mean, this is, these are things that we hear so often. You're getting static again, buddy. But these are things that we keep hearing about over and over again. It seems so nonsensical that we as a country would allow this to continue as our MO. It just doesn't seem like it makes sense to me that we would allow this to continue. I mean, is it really just, has our life been boiled down so much that the only thing that we care about whatsoever in this nation is just simply our paycheck? I mean, is that really all we value in America anymore? And it seems like the answer to that question is yes. Here's one. You and I dealt with this earlier, Nate. The second one, the old grumpy man here. There's no free lunch. Talk about that one.
What's so funny about it is just how hilariously untrue it is. Free lunches are everywhere, whether it's the pile of treasury bonds that someone's sitting on, whether it's the guy who inherited from his parents, who inherited from his parents, and so on, and he lives on the income of some rental building in New York City, and just sits there and doesn't upkeep and maintain it, but evicts some people every few months and collects some rent. If you look around in our society, there's nothing but free lunch. There's an enormous amount of free lunches, and they mostly come at your expense. They're mostly about land value. They're mostly about banking. They're about, someone's big salaries at the top of a company. That you really think that, even if you have a CEO who's working 60 hours, 70 hours a week, it's much different to work when you get to order everyone around and you have 3 assistants and you have this and you have that and you get driven to and from your nice penthouse apartment in a limousine. It's also, even if, yes, they've contributed something, but have they contributed hundreds and millions of dollars worth of something? Probably not. It's probably because they have, there's connections and there's relationships in the lead that make sure that someone gets to take that spot. There's all sorts of free lunches, and it mostly comes at ordinary people's expenses. And you can tell that it comes at people near the bottom of society expenses too, because those are the people who are doing all the menial jobs for these people. They're the people who are nannying their kids. They're the people who are serving them food. They're the people cleaning the bathrooms. The real important work that, things that you wouldn't actually want or to go without, and would probably much sacrifice 10 administrative jobs going undone so that those jobs get done. These are all things getting done by people working just as hard as that big CEO or that that vice president in a company, but they're getting paid a ton more. If you open your eyes to it, there's tons of free lunches. I was just looking at data today that since the early 80s, half of on average, like average or median, half of companies' net incomes are getting paid out in dividends. What's that if not a free lunch? If you went to the 1970s or 60s, much fewer dividends were getting paid out. When they increased paying out dividends by 10% of their profits, that's a free lunch that someone is collecting, and it's probably not you.
Here, let's look at this. Yvette saying something that I think we all agree with 100%. I'm not sure why you would feel that we're not saying this, but Yvette Marie says, we need to fight for a living wage instead of hating on the rich. We need to hate corporate tax breaks and grants that could go to the poor. Again, this is a little bit misguided, but the idea here that it's either or, the idea of right-sizing the economy instead of, or balancing the economy, I should say, as opposed to all these shouldas, I think is a real problem. But anyway, I could make the case, Nathan, that we should get rid of corporate tax altogether, corporate income tax, and focus it instead on Pigovian taxes that benefit, that create behaviors that make us happy to have these as good corporate citizens. Here, let's move to the next one on our real wonderful little meme here. And that's entitlements are unsustainable. This might be the biggest horse hockey of them all. Let's talk about entitlements being unsustainable for a minute.
Yeah. This one is, it's one of the most amazing sort of memes out there that you can sort of get ordinary people to buy into. First, the arguments about Social Security get so extremely broad. Social Security in some ways is the easiest because even on sort of normal liberal, maybe I should say Dean Baker standards, there's nothing here. There's, there's the Social Security Trust Fund, which is just a record. It's just an accounting record of how much has been paid out Social Security payments versus how much has been received in quote unquote Social Security taxes, which of course, just deletes some IOUs, some Federal Reserve IOUs that were outstanding in the public. And even according to like the most conservative, ridiculous projections, that isn't supposed to hit zero in 35 until like 35, 40 years from now. And as we all know, as you should know as a good MMT person, they can still send out the checks, even if some accounting number goes to zero. They can send out the checks if they want to. It's only if Congress is deadlocked or if Congress is actively looking to screw seniors that they don't pay those out. Now, Medicare is and healthcare is a little different because these are costs that first of all, it isn't a government budget problem. It is something about our economy as a whole, that healthcare is growing as a percentage of GDP. And in some ways that's good because healthcare and other sort of labor-intensive services that we really care about, the things that we really care about, like taking care of our kids, education, and healthcare, these are the things where we should be paying more and we can afford to pay more because productivity is going up. And that's what it's really about. It's about real resources. It's cheaper now than it's ever has been before to provide food and goods and services and clothing and housing to the nurses and the doctors who we rely on for medical care. And
well, hold on, let me. I want to bring up a thing that I find to be fascinating. We talk about real resources or what we care mostly about, not the pieces of paper, right? And when we think about that, what is a real resource? If I get housing rolled into a benefit, or if I get Medicare for all rolled in as a benefit, these are things that I know for a fact that I can consider wealth. That's actually increasing my net resources, if you will. Maybe not net paper dollars, but consider this what the paper dollar is actually getting, as opposed to, worrying about devaluing my dollars. If you put a value to the cost of these services and you consider it that way, to me, that seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, what more are you really, worried about in terms of quote unquote your money if we're covering healthcare, if we're making sure that that everyone is housed, that we're making sure that everyone has a meal. I mean, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, other things that you should go for, but these are really the things that keep families up at night worried about. And this is something that, is still, unfortunately, a huge concern in our society. Massive medical bankruptcies, people who are just bankrupted by medical debt. And we have the ability, by changing our healthcare system, of ending those kinds of things. And that is, how could that not be what you're really thinking about on a day-to-day basis? And we have the resources to provision we have the people that we can train, or the people that are already trained to provide these kinds of services. We just need to start paying them to do it. That is the key essential point. And when you're looking at whether we can afford something, you have to be looking at, well, are there people we can train to do these things? Are there the raw materials that we'll need to build this stuff? These are the things that you should be thinking in terms of. And it doesn't matter how big your piggy bank is. If there isn't anyone around to provide you with the healthcare services that you need, it doesn't matter how many dollars in the world you have. So worrying about, balancing the budget or making sure you personally have a bunch of money in your nest egg pales in comparison to these social problems and these social institutions that we need to build. It doesn't matter how much, for most people, it doesn't matter how much you manage to squirrel away, a healthcare emergency can still bankrupt you. And you have a tremendous interest, even just for pure self-interest, if you're not, compelled by the social necessity of healthcare, in making sure that isn't going to happen to you, that a healthcare bankruptcy, that, homelessness by healthcare isn't going to happen to you. And believe me, it's happening.
Okay, let's go to the next guy here. This one's priceless. He goes, "I'm a patriot. You're a parasite." I mean, this right here feeds right into Raul's the article that he wrote with Jesse Myers, and this is a really, really, really prevalent, jingoistic, nationalistic, right-wing kind of thinking, but it's also very pervasive in the Democratic Party as well. It's not only Republicans, lest anybody fool themselves into believing otherwise. Nathan, let's talk about that. Patriot, parasite.
Yeah, I mean, this is just another way of saying maker and taker. It's interesting to mention the Democrats' point. I mean, every time I hear a Democrat talking about "I am a patriot," it's just such this obvious insecurity that they don't really feel like there is a conviction that they can stand behind. If you have conviction, if you have, well, I think that people need X, Y, Z. I think people need healthcare, housing, and jobs, and you really fundamentally believe in the importance of these kinds of things. You believe in the importance of childcare. You believe in the importance of reducing our military adventurism around the world. You don't need this insecure, but I'm a patriot. It's only the people who don't really have a strong conviction in the back, but they sort of their conviction is, I'm a reasonable person, and I have a legitimate piece of this discourse. And
okay, Nathan, I want to speak this up real quick. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I'm stealing the mic.
No worries.
So here's a situation. We've got people out there who are, really, really feeding the whole belief that their Social Security dollars are literally going into a piggy bank, and that's their money. It's just sitting there in their little piggy bank, and they really don't understand it. They're coming in. It's almost a beautiful thing that we got some people that never, ever understood how this happens. They just believe the FDR fibberonis that made them feel like they got the pay-fors, the buy-in, the skin in the game. They really believe this. So let's help disabuse them of these very, very toxic beliefs.
Yeah. So I think the thing to cut to the chase is the people who are working, they are working really hard, and they're contributing just as much as you are. Your tax bill isn't, a sign of how much you're contributing. Well, how much you're contributing is how much you're working, how much you're providing these other real resources to these social projects that we think are important, or that we allow private entities to do because we think them producing goods and services is important. And to the people who aren't working, those people are involuntarily unemployed because we haven't set up a system that productively uses them for social goals, for public purpose, and it gives them an opportunity to actualize their life. And so, no one here is a parasite. You're either someone who's contributing, or you're someone who isn't being allowed to contribute it because of the way our society is designed. And if you want to keep on, and if you want to try to obsess to the last penny, you're missing the point. The point of money isn't to obsess and, well, you're $10 less contribution than me. The point is, as a society, contributing to what we think needs to be done.
Yep. All right, so let's go to the next one. This one's a fun one too. You're the cause of the U.S. government's debt crisis.
Well, I mean, there's the basic level of there is no U.S. government debt crisis. If there is a crisis, it's been an ongoing crisis of not spending enough and having this endless sluggish economy where, even as, the unemployment rate falls, how many people out there who are employed relative to the population still is incredibly low and still well below highs in the late 90s. And then, of course, there's the psychological thing behind this of seeing problems in the society, and instead of seeing these as social problems, seeing these as trying to find a scapegoat who you can blame. And of course, it all becomes more dramatic and fits a right-wing frame better when you have the government's debt crisis, especially because you can obsess with quote-unquote entitlements. But all that is nonsense.
Okay, I just threw up this meme here just to show everybody the whole what does the deficit owl say, what does the owl say. I've always loved that meme, so I got a bunch of them thrown in there. I'm trying to pull them up as we go. Let's go to the next joker here real quickly. This guy right here, he says, the only reason you defend the poor is that you're as lazy as they are.
I mean, that's just a complete level of unreality. I mean, there's a certain type of person who, no doubt that they have worked in their lives and they have contributed, but they think that they know for sure that they've contributed the most and everyone else is lazy. I've been around a lot of ordinary working class people, going to public schools in New York City rather than being shoved off into some private school. And man, I promise anyone who's like that kind of person saying that kind of thing, most people are working a lot harder than he is. Even just the basics of keeping a household together is really, really hard when you don't have money and you're scraping by. And it's either, taking out this payday loan or your kids don't eat for a week. I mean, that's hard work. Being poor is incredibly hard, debilitating work. And I think just there's a lot of middle class, upper middle class people just have no idea.
All right. So let's bring up our next jokester here. Go ahead and take a read here. What has he got to say? He says, social programs give away other people's freaking money, brother. This is the big joke, isn't it?
No, absolutely not. And what's funny is, as Rawls has been interacting with people, he's brought up this point that is really interesting. We don't do this with anything, though there are other places where you could apply it much better. We don't call the money corporations spend consumers' money or subsidy money, but that would be a lot more accurate than saying taxpayers' money about the federal government. But we don't say that. Why? Because we think that corporations have a legitimate right, a property right, so to speak, to do with their retained earnings or their funds, their savings, whatever they will. But somehow when it comes to the government spending, no, that's me and I have a special right because of I've been taxed. It's a frame that is purely right-wing, purely ideological, meant to constrain any thinking about public purpose. I would want people to complain and bemoan about renters' money and consumers' money much before I would ever accept them giving me this kind of narrative about social programs.
All right, so this next one's a fun one. I think you'll love this one. The bottom line is the government must live within its means. The federal government must live within its means. The government has no means, does it?
No.
It either has them or doesn't have them.
No, not in money terms. It might have. You can have a government that has a difficult time getting all the real resources, hiring all the people they want as administrators, but that's a problem with having enough labor now around, having enough workers. It's not a problem in terms of money. But the craziest part about this kind of thing is is that in the way that this person's probably thinking in terms of a balanced budget surplus, we can't afford that. For the only way for our government to live within its means massive spending on things like climate change, massive spending on things like healthcare, because that's the only way that future generations, that the future government, that future presidents are going to inherit, or future everybody is going to inherit a livable society, a livable environment, in order to be able to do any of the things that they want to do in the future. And the only way they're going to inherit a population that is, able enough, alive enough to contribute in all the ways that they want to contribute through work, and to complete all the social projects they need to do through work. We can't. It's the only thing that we can't afford right now. The only thing that is far beyond our means is not spending on all these things and cutting Social Security and gutting our healthcare system even more, and not doing anything in terms of making our communities ecologically sustainable. These are the things we can't afford. That's far outside of our means. We have to completely change this framing, especially now when there's all these things we need to ensure to make sure that there is a society for grandchildren to inherit. The possibilities of our grandchildren.
Let me say something that I don't think a gentleman such as yourself would say, or maybe you would say, because I've seen you throw the elbow down a couple times. So here's the thing, right? The real debt to our children is an environment and a climate that can't sustain their life. It's not paper money.
Yeah.
The real debt to our children is a lack of health care, not the pieces of paper. The real debt that our children will inherit is wars for oil, when we could be having green energy today had we just had the foresight and willingness to actually invest in it. So in my mind, and I'm just going to be real honest, I have half a mind to take you off the screen so you don't get smeared with this. But in my mind, I will call these people that say these things about paper debt, I call them murderers by proxy, Nathan. I call them murderers by policy, and murderers, more importantly, by proxy, because their own hate, that evil that lives in themselves, that thinks somehow or another they're getting a little bit more than that person over there, that holds them back because they think their tax dollars are paying for these things. That parasite, that is a parasite. That is a murderer. That person has the blood of all those freaking people dying under the bridges that have died from exposure, those people that died for a lack of health care, those people that died, or the children that went to jail because they had a bad nutrition in school and then in turn acted in a different way. And the people that have had people go to jail for having to live in an alternative economy because we didn't make the one that we want work for them. Those people I consider to be murderers, Nathan. I don't consider the paper debt the issue. I consider the real debt the deaths, the lack of an environment, the lack of clean water. That is the murderers. The people that don't want to spend on that are literally, and I'm telling you right now, I want to scrape my shoe off with how little I think of that mindset. They are murderers, and no amount of niceness is going to take that away. Go ahead, man. Make me feel like a fool.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I'm a responsibility rolls uphill kind of guy. I think that you got to start with the people who are actually implementing policy and have been implementing policy. You know, the people who are elites in both parties, the people who are CEOs in various companies who have the ability to change minds and devote resources to certain political activities instead they do others. I mean, these are the people who I focus. They're the ones who have the most agency in this society. I'm not gonna say you're wrong for being outraged at these people you interact with. I would certainly be frustrated interacting with, but for me personally, I can only direct that outrage, that anger at the people I see who have the most agency. And that's not to say that the people you're talking about have no agency, that they have no responsibility, or they have no fault. But, you know, I'm the kind of person who I'm just looking at the top of the list.
Sure. Now, I'm going to bring us to the last thing here, Nate. This is, to me, this one right here is a big deal, and it's a kind of a shift from what we've been talking about. This right here, and I'm just going to give you a little clue. Robert Reich came out and made this article and talked about how, don't worry, the Trump tax plan is so bad, just all you have to do is think about Kansas. But there's Stephanie right in simultaneous motion saying if you're using Kansas or Brownback to argue Trump's tax cuts will wreck the government finances, you're doing bad analysis. And so we lost about 60 people in one day for me daring to criticize Bobby Reich. I mean, this is how pathetic our movement is at times. They don't understand, so they just immediately reflexively, just have a friggin' brain fart. Oh, I can't be around them. I mean, let's talk about this. This is a big deal. This is a real big foundational economic thing about states, currency issuers, currency users, and the role between the states and the Fed.
Yeah. So I would say that just straight up, standard point here is state and local budgets are completely different from federal budgets, and anything you're talking about in state and local budgets, you should not be talking about at the federal level. I mean, from the federal level, you have the Treasury, you have the Federal Reserve, you have them coordinating. This is, the same MMT point all over and over. They're not going to run out of money. There are no bond vigilantes going after the federal government. This isn't how you should be talking about Trump's tax cuts. Now, the issue with Trump's tax cuts is it's not focused on what matters. What matters to us is real resources and redirecting them and reorganizing them in socially productive ways. And you do that with spending. You don't do that with tax cuts, and you don't do it. And the one spending they are willing to do is military spending, and you don't do it with that. That's the main reason to want to say forget these tax cuts. That's the main thing. Yeah, they might be some distributional implications, yada yada, but we're in a crisis right now, and the crisis is a lack of spending on these social issues, and that's what you should be focusing on. And to not only be obsessing about the tax cut, but also be obsessing with it's going to destroy the government's budget. That is the completely wrong way to be thinking right now. And if you're thinking like that, you're thinking like someone who's just a reflexive, Democratic Party apart check. You're not thinking in terms of what actually this society needs. And yeah, maybe you won't have the right people in power to listen to that message in the next couple of years. But the only way you're going to have that is by keeping the important stuff on the top of the list and not, these gotchas against Republicans. People have been doing gotchas against Republicans all of my life and making them look stupid and yada yada. That stuff doesn't work. You have to put a positive vision about what's actually going on. Something matters in order to do well politically. And the worst part of this stuff, not only that it's MMT not compliant, not only that it's economically incoherent, the worst part is it's a complete distraction from all the social things, from all the most pressing problems our society has.
All right, so I'm going to show one more Stephanie Kelton tweet that I think is really powerful. It says, what Chad Pergram put up a minution on Fox on tax reform. We're pretty comfortable that this will be a $1 trillion positive, paying down the deficit. And Kelton pops him with a good funny. I love MMT humor. This is the best. All right, so go ahead, man. Talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is amazing. I mean, it's always incredible. These most basic stuff people don't get. You don't pay down the deficit. The deficit is a flow. The deficit is either smaller during a period or bigger than a period. It's debt that goes up and down. It's debt that is either lower or higher. It's just so mind-boggling to have people to even have to explain to someone who is at the head of our government on just such a super, super basic point. And of course, it's revealing of everything else. The assumption that what matters is cutting deficits or paying down debt, which of course is wrong. But just even the most basic point that you can't even get right. It's just a symbol. It's just a perfect symbol of the intellectual laziness here.
So Nate, I want to ask you one more thing here real quickly. I'm going to drop this down. I'm going to make it just you and I, baby. So let's talk for a second. So, we could spend days, if not weeks, without even taking a break to talk about all the myths and legends that are prevalent in the progressive movement, sadly. There has been a perversion almost where the Ron Paul world has creeped into the progressive movement, and people are biting in. They're reading blogs that are from right-wing sources, LOL libertarian sources, because the LOL libertarians enjoy smoking weed. People just assume that means they're good at math, and they're not. They're terrible. And so because they have a religious belief that money didn't come from the government, although it does because we have a state currency, what is it that we can do to purge this virus that has penetrated what would normally have been a group of people that would be pushing the hardest for a Green New Deal or a New Deal and this whole suite of packages? Instead, they're sitting there dinking and dunking, nickel and diamond, going small ball for these little things. Hey, fight for 15 instead of actually freaking going for the whole Monty, because they genuinely have been hit with the austerity bug, and they think they are woke they think they are so woke, and they're not. I mean, it's pathetic. What do you think is the key to getting the Ron Paul stain, that taint, out of the movement? I mean, is there a way to do it? Or, I mean, what's going on? How did that happen?
I think there are always going to be people attracted to that sort of thing. I think that it's a real symptom of the failures of the Obama years, that they were the only people around that you could get to talk about those kinds of issues, or issues like militarism and issues like basic drug policy reform. I'm not so worried about it. Those kind of people, I think, are disproportionately prominent on the internet. I don't think that they are. They're of course around. They're of course people who think of themselves as left or liberals who are attracted to that sort of thing and get attracted to right-wing narratives about economics through those kind of sources. But maybe I'm too blasé on it. But I think that they are very well represented on the internet, and that causes problems and barriers in terms of promoting things through social media. But ultimately, I think that that is the kind of thing that is especially prevalent on the internet, and they don't really do things in terms of organizing out in their local communities.
Are you trying to tell me that these are gamers that are sitting there and in between shooting up, Gronk's Revenge or whatever? They're over there, banging away on their keyboard at the same time. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Whatever they're doing in between, I do not judge. I do not know, but it is not. Let's just say I don't see them, at New York community organizing stuff.
Fair enough. So they're heavily represented on social media, but in the real world, they're non-existent.
Yeah, well, maybe not non-existent, but they're. I don't think that they're the major barrier in terms of organizing on the streets.
All right. Well, Nathan, I'm going to thank you for joining me, sir. It's always a pleasure. Got to have you back more often. That's all I can say.
Definitely.
All right.
Until next time.
Have a good night, buddy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.